Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me in this series on leadership potholes and how to avoid them. Today's lesson is on the Zigzag leader. It's going to be an exciting time together. Before we get into that, let me mention at the very end of the video, you can see contact information. If you want to give me comments, feedback, questions, if you want some leadership coaching in your own life, contact me. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know what you're thinking. I'd love to hear from you. When I think about the Zigzag leader, I think about a couple years I spent in Florida. And when I first arrived, the residents there said, you got to watch out for alligators. If there's any body of water, if there's a lake, a stream, a swamp, anything, you got to assume that there's alligators in there. I thought, well, okay, great. What's that to me? And they said, well, sometimes alligators chase people, and alligators are really fast. And if an alligator chases you, here's what they told me. They said the best way to get away from an alligator is to zigzag. And I said, why would that be? I should zigzag if an alligator's chasing me? They said, well, it's because alligators they're really fast, but they only can go in one direction. They're not very good at zigging and zagging. So if you zig and zag, you can outsmart the alligators. Well, for several years I believed that, but it turned out it's really a myth. And according to ChatGPT, the best way to get rid of an alligator is to run faster than it, and it'll tire out and it'll give up chasing you. Well, anyway, do your own research on that. I do not vouch for anything about alligators. But the point of it is that zigzag leaders are hard to follow. They're really hard to follow. And my dad had a cousin named Richard. I'll just call him Richard, I guess. And I loved the guy. He was so full of energy, full of life, so enthusiastic. And Richard would come over to our house every couple months, and he always had some new thing to share with us. It might be a new book he had read. It might be a conspiracy theory he'd heard. It might be some new fad diet. It might be a multi-level marketing opportunity. It might be new spiritual experiences. But it was always an exciting time when Richard came over because he was full of the latest and greatest of new things. Well, I loved the guy. And it was always fascinating. I always enjoyed being with him. But as I look back at his life and the end of his life, I realized that I think he was a brilliant person, but I don't think he ever really lived up to the potential that he had, the God-given potential that the Lord gave him. Why is that? Because as he was zigging and as he was zagging, he wasn't really going in a straight line. So in the end of the day, he didn't really get any place very far because right when he was on the verge of something great, he would zig and zag and get caught up in some other new fad. Well, that was a real lesson to me because zigging and zagging is not a good thing for leaders, and it's really not a good thing for success in life. So if you tend to be a zigzag person, I encourage you to figure out where you're going and try to go in a straight line. Well, a lot of organizations that I've worked with or known about also have problems with zigging and zagging. I was once on the staff of a large church, and the history was that the pastor took the church over when it was just a traditional mainline Presbyterian church. He wore clerical robes, they had the liturgies, they did all the traditional stuff that churches do. And that's how it was when it started, and it was pretty small. And after a while, though, this pastor got interested in charismatic things, gifts of the Holy Spirit, supernatural experiences, things like that. And so he began to change the whole church. And so instead of the robes, he would just come out, and sometimes he'd go in the audience, the congregation, and he would pray for people or prophesy over people or, have different things to say and pray for healings, all that kind of thing. And so it was a totally different church than where it started. Well, he was a gifted speaker and a gifted leader in many ways, and he was very personable, so the church grew. And but it wasn't growing enough from his perspective, and so he changed in the 1990s to more of a seeker church. I don't know if you know what that means, but Willow Creek Church, Bill Hybels, they had a seeker church movement where they dumbed down the entire service. They made it shorter, more streamlined. And they geared it entirely for new people, lost people, seekers, So it wasn't as deep of a Bible study. It wasn't deeply spiritual, but it was appealing to people that were new and were just inquiring. Well, again, the church grew and it was making some progress in that way. But then by the time I was on the staff, the church had grown and they had become a program-oriented church. And by that I mean they had programs for everything. They had a large singles group. They had a divorce care group and a grief share group. They had even a group for disabled people, where they would get together and fellowship together. And so it was, pretty amazing. And we had over 400 people every Wednesday night coming for discipleship. That was incredible. We did leadership seminars. But at some point, the pastor again changed. He again shifted, and he said, we're going to get rid of all these specialty groups, and we're just going to have home groups, home generic fellowships, and that's where we believe that all the life change is going to happen. So, people got to make their decisions. He made his decision. And basically, most of the staff lost their jobs because they weren't needed anymore because it was going to be a whole different direction. Well, anyway, that was interesting. Again, the church continued to grow because this guy was good on Sundays, a good pulpit person. But there's a lot of turmoil with the staff, and it was a painful time for some of us. But the interesting thing is, I thought I could be kind of offended by some of the things that happened in that large church. But then I realized that I had done this sort of the same thing. Back in 1990, I became the senior pastor of a church in Ohio. And the church was a great church in many ways, had some fantastic people, dedicated believers that loved Jesus and really were hungry to know more about him. But on the other hand, for about 3 years before I became the pastor, the church had plateaued. It hadn't grown, hadn't really gained new people. And so I decided to go more in a seeker kind of way. Let's have a church where you can invite your friends, invite your neighbors, invite people that are just inquiring. And we had our kind of charismatic things as well, but we also made a pretty big change on Sunday morning. Well, hey, the good news is, for the first year or so, it worked. We gained new people for the first time in several years. That was exciting. That was really encouraging to me. But the bad news is the longtime members that we had been around for about 9 years, those longtime members got sad, frustrated, angry, because some of the things that we had for them before were no longer there. And so we had taken a turn and we lost some people. In fact, we lost a lot of people, lost about half the church. It was incredible. And sadly, a lot of people got hurt. And it was partly my decision that hurt them. And I'm sad to say that, but it didn't work out to the extent that I wanted it to. The analogy I had back in those days is if you ever got on a bus, and a bus usually at the top of it, it'll say where the bus is going. So let's say you got on a bus and it said Orlando. And you say, oh, that's great. I'd like to go to Orlando. And you get on the bus, and about halfway through the trip, the bus driver gets up and turns the crank, and it says Milwaukee. And you're saying, wait a minute. When I got on the bus, it said Orlando. Now it says Milwaukee. It's like bait and switch. This is not fair. You changed it on me. Well, that's what a zigzag leader is like. People get on the bus thinking it's going to this direction, and then it changes. And so sometimes it works, but it's just like a large ocean liner. If you're in a speedboat, you can make radical turns and almost 90-degree angle turns. But if you're on an ocean liner, if you're on a cruise ship, your changes have to be well thought out. They have to be gradual. They have to be done well and correctly. And a lot of times zigzag leaders aren't aware of that. They have in their mind this great new idea, this great new thing that they're going to pursue, but they lose people. They hurt people. It's a tough thing. Well, the bottom line is sometimes we need to make changes, though. We don't have time to really get into it, but I love the story in the Bible. In 2 Kings chapter 7, there's 4 lepers sitting at the gate of a city that was in a time of famine, and basically everybody was dying because they had no food. They had nothing to eat and drink, and it was a tough time. And these lepers say this profound thing to themselves and to each other. They say, "Why do we sit here until we die?" In other words, we got to make a change. And that's what I would say to you, my friend. If you do not like the place you're in life, if you do not like your place in your relationships and your family and your ministry and your career, you got to make some changes. And so these lepers took a bold step and they went to the enemy camp, so to speak, and it all turned out great. You have to read the story. So sometimes we need to make changes. One of the most amazing stories I've heard recently is back in 1894, Sears and Roebuck Company created their famous catalog. It was a catalog of all their things, and basically, I think one of their mottos was, "You can get anything at Sears." Well, that's something. That's like Amazon, doesn't it? This is back in 1894, and they created this catalog, and the original catalog had 322 pages. It was the Amazon of its day, and it even said satisfaction guaranteed, or we'll give you your money back. What does that sound like? Sounds like Amazon Prime, huh? And so it went on, and it went on, and it went on. But as time went on, print media was falling in some disrepute. It cost too much money to print all those 322 pages. And people didn't want to read all that stuff. They wanted to find something where they could scan it and find it on Amazon, do a search, and it was a lot easier. So by 1993, they discontinued the famous Sears catalog, Sears and Roebuck catalog. Isn't that something? Now, what happened there? Now, you would have thought they would have had a leg up on Amazon. They could have been the Amazon. They could have out Amazoned at Amazon. But instead of that, they failed to make the changes. So while I'm saying that zigzag leadership can be a bad thing, a toxic thing, an unfortunate thing, sometimes you got to take changes. You sometimes have to read where the wind is blowing. You have to make changes. And Sears Roebuck had an amazing opportunity to be in first place with all the products because they carried all the products. But instead of that, Amazon and other companies, eBay and others, they took the lead in that. Wow, what a lesson that is. And sometimes people that are leaders make radical changes, and you're not really sure how that's going to turn out. Like Elon Musk, a year or two ago, changed the name of Twitter to X. I think that's a really stupid move from my perspective, because how can you X somebody? I mean, instead of send a tweet, you send an X, or I don't know. I just don't really get it. But he's a smart guy. He's done well. Twitter, X, whatever it is, seems to keep going. But it's a pretty radical change to change your name when you had this large organization that was already gone. Steve Jobs, I love the biography of Steve Jobs. I'd encourage you to read it sometime. A lot of lessons there. Steve Jobs was making a lot of changes from time to time, but he also had some values. He had some principles. He had some things he was trying to achieve for the consumer. And so even when he made changes to Apple, it was always with the end in mind. It was always with certain principles that were important. I once worked at a Christian TV network. Well, it did well for a long time. It helped people, changed people, a lot of preaching, teaching, music, a lot of things that people around the world would watch. But then guess what happened? They read the tea leaves. They realized that TV was a little bit of a dying breed the way it was. People were cord cutters. People were watching things online. People were watching things on their social media, on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all those kind of things. And so this Christian TV network changed their model quite a bit. And they geared things to a digital content mode. And from their perspective, they're reaching a whole lot more people and it's also a lot more cost effective. Well, anyway, you'll have to decide, was that a good move or not? But I think they felt like they had to do that. That's what was happening. Well, what does the Bible say about zigzag leaders? Well, generally it says, it warns against vacillating. Here's a verse that I like. I'm going to read it. It's kind of a long passage, and this is in the Message version. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 17 to 22. It says, "Are you now going to accuse me of flip-flopping with my promises because it didn't work out?" Who wants to follow a flip-flopping leader, huh? "Do you think I talk out of both sides of my mouth? A glib yes one moment, a glib no the next. Well, you're wrong. I try to be as true to my word as God is to his. Our word to you wasn't a careless yes canceled by an indifferent no. How could it be? When Silas and Timothy and I proclaimed the Son of God among you, did you pick up on any yes and no? On again, off again, waffling? Wasn't it a clean, strong yes? You see, Paul realized that it would be hard for anybody to give him any credibility if he's always changing. Yes and no. What do you think about that? Well, yes, well, no. That's the way politicians talk. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. They're waffling. They're always changing. They only follow the winds. It's just not a great thing. And so other Bible verses, like James chapter 1, verses 5 to 8, talk about not being double-minded. If you're double-minded, it says you're unstable in all of your ways. It's hard for people to follow a double-minded person. And then it warns in Ephesians 4, verse 14, don't be blown around by every wind of doctrine. Don't be blown around. You get that picture. There's no anchor. You're just blown around. Now, some leaders are like that. A lot of people are like that. They're a little bit like my dad's cousin Richard. They're always onto the new thing, but the winds are just blowing them in a rapid way that's not really productive. Well, speaking of winds, let me tell you a story. On my honeymoon, we went to Ocho Rios, Jamaica, and there was a bay there, and I wanted to impress my wife, and I asked the rental company to rent a sailboat. And they said, of course, well, do you have any experience sailing? I said, oh, yeah. Do I have any experience sailing? Of course, I can sail. Well, yeah, I had sailed once or twice in a small little tiny lake in Ohio, and there was no wind blowing. It was, quite a bit different thing than being in the ocean bay there on the coast of Jamaica. But anyway, I wanted to impress my wife. Hey, I can do this and everything. Well, within about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, our sailboat was just about to crash into the rocks because I couldn't control the thing. It was totally different than that little sailboat that I had in Ohio in a nice peaceful lake. And so thankfully, some experienced people were watching that day, and they came and rescued us from the rocks. And then one of them got in our sailboat, and he actually sailed the right way and showed us how to do it to get back to the dock. Well, there's a lot of lessons in sailing. I love sailing. One of the sailing lessons, if you study it at all, it's called tacking. Tacking. And what is tacking? I never was very good at it, obviously, but I know the principle, and I love the principle. So in tacking, you figure out where you're going. There's a destination, but you have to catch the wind in your sail if the boat's going to go anyplace. So from time to time, you got to shift the sail because the wind's not always going in the same direction. And also, when you're tacking, sometimes you're going to the right, sometimes you're going to the left, and you have to adjust based on what your destination is. So good leaders have to learn to tack. They do have to recognize where the wind is and where the trends are and what's going on with the world, the church, the organization. Where are things? You have to have wind in your sails if you're going to succeed, if you're going to go anyplace. That's an important thing. However, you also have to continually when you're tacking in a sailboat, you have to continually realign with your destination. Because as you tack, because of the wind current, as you tack again to the other side with the wind current, you have to realize, now we need to go this way, now we need to go that way, because this is our destination. And you see the church in the book of Acts, and the church of book of Acts made a lot of changes. There were changes about the Gentiles and this and that. They had an organizational structure in Acts chapter 6. So that happened. They had to make changes. Change is not a bad thing. However, they always made the changes in alignment with their mission. Their mission was to win lost people and turn them into fully devoted disciples of Jesus. Well, do you know what your destination is? Do you know what your target is? When I do leadership seminars, I always have my props. Well, here's a prop. It's a target. It's a bullseye. And so when you are a leader, you might have to go this way, you might have to go that way, but in the end of the day, you have to remember, what are we trying to accomplish here? If you're a for-profit organization, your main profit might be to make money. If you're a Christian organization, you have quite a bit different target, even though you have to pay the bills and all that sort of thing. What's your target? Do you know what your target is? That is such an important thing. And another prop I use a lot in my leadership seminars is a compass. I don't know how well you can see that here. It's a compass. I love compasses, A compass is a great thing. If you're in your sailboat and you're going this way and that way, every so often you got to get your compass out and say, where is true north? Where are we going here? And I encourage you, if you're a leader, to have clear values of what is true north in your life and in your heart, because many people really don't have any convictions. They don't have any values. They really don't even know what their mission and their objective is. And so if we're going to be not the wrong kind of zigzag leader, we have to have our spiritual compass. We have to know where we're going and where we are at any moment in time. I also love those mall maps. You go to the mall map and it says, you are here. And you're trying to get over to this place and that place, but it says you are here. You have to know where you are, and that's an important thing. That's why a compass comes in handy. Well, I have a few final questions for you, and these are really important questions. Do you have clarity on your intended destination for your life, for your organization, for your ministry, whatever it is? Do you know where you're going? Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, as somebody once said. You have to know where you're going. That is such a crucial thing. And then, based on that intended destination, is it time to make some changes and readjust your course? So I'm not suggesting that you just have to keep on going the same place. The old definition of insanity, I'm going to do the same thing over and over again. I'm going to expect different results. That's stupid. That's insanity, right? However, you want the changes to really be geared to what your intended course is, what your intended destination is. That's important. Well, the third question is, if changes are needed, do you have a plan to minimize the disruption, the collateral damage, the disruption to those who are following you? Because there will be challenges anytime there's change. There will be resistance anytime there's change. And so it's important to have a plan. How long is it going to take? What are ways to make it a more palatable thing? What are ways to explain and expand the vision and let people know why you're making this change? Wow, so much more we could say about this zigzag leader thing. But I'm praying for you today. I'm praying you'll have clear vision. You'll know what your intended destination is. I'm praying you'll be a purposeful leader, but also a compassionate leader. So God bless you until our next session.